Elden Ring has been taking the gaming world by storm lately, and it's no surprise, the game is absolutely brilliant. If you were wondering why my videos have been slow lately, yeah, that's why. But after spending so many hours in the lands between, a world full of fantasy, knights, queens, witches and mythology, I have come to one conclusion. Aliens. No, really, I promise this isn't a late April Fool's joke. So in case you haven't played Elden Ring yet, massive spoilers ahead by the way, or in case you need a refresher, the story of Elden Ring is about as dark and mysterious as the games that came before it. Dark Souls, the tale of a random undead nobody who decides the fate of the Age of Fire. Sekiro, the story of a man who fights against the tyranny of immortality. And Bloodborne, the cautionary tale that tells you not to drink the blood of ancient beings you find underground. Thought that one was obvious. This latest adventure brings you to the lands between, which, in stark comparison, seems much brighter than the worlds in the previous games. Although, that might just be the giant golden Erd tree in the middle of it. The lands between are currently broken. Very broken. The ruling goddess of these lands, Queen Marsika the Eternal, shattered the Elden Ring, the physical manifestation of existence. This mysterious object was sent to the lands between by an outer god known as the Greater Will. The pieces of the shattered Elden Ring were scattered amongst Marsika's children, who themselves are demigods. Enter the player. You play as a Tarnished, someone who lost the blessing of the Elden Ring and the Erd Tree and was banished from the lands between forever. Until now, when they bring you back to slay the demigods that have started warring against each other. You slay your way through the lands between, every step getting closer to claiming the title of Elden Lord, where your choices will determine the fate of the lands between forever. Pretty much everything from this point on is debatable. Like all Souls games, the lore is very complicated and open to interpretation, which is just how I like it. But now you have a basic grasp of the story, let's dive into exactly how everything in Elden Ring is caused by aliens. This theory, like most of my theories, all started with one detail, one hidden thing that stood out as a little bit odd. In Castle Stormveil, there is a room that most players will probably miss, at least on their first playthrough. This room is tucked away and I actually had to do a little bit of parkour to reach it. Once I found it though, I discovered that buried underneath the castle was a giant Lovecraftian looking face. Now this thing is unlike anything else in the game, well, except for one thing that we'll discuss in a moment. But this creature, which looks to be long dead, stands out in contrast to almost everything else we can find in the game. It's also very interesting that it's hidden away like this. It definitely looks alien to me, almost Lovecraftian. But look closely because this detail is important. The creature has two eye sockets with the eyes seemingly missing, with a third eye on its forehead. Okay, so a random weird looking creature in the depths of the castle, how does this relate to the world? Quite simply, I believe this is a creature from outer space. So let's look at the evidence that makes me think this. The first thing that made me start to look into this more seriously is the third eye on this creature's forehead, or at least the thing that looks like a third eye. There are actually a number of creatures in the game that follow a very similar design. The first one is another missable detail, an optional boss, Astol. Astol, or Astol Natural Born of the Void as its full title, is a boss that requires a little bit of exploration to find. Found in the Eternal City, a city underneath the lands between, this creature looks almost like it is made out of tiny planets. Some are even ringed. Notice how the creature looks half dead, the skull is exposed and it looks like it has no flesh on its arms either. But the thing that ties this to the creature buried below Castle Stormveil is that very obvious third eye on its forehead. Now this creature is almost definitely not native to the planet the game is set on. First of all, its name Natural Born of the Void could be anywhere but space itself is a void. The creature is also described as being a malformed star, which implies it came from outer space. We could even look at its name as being another hint, Astol being very similar to the word astral, which means relating to or resembling the stars. Interestingly enough, this boss uses gravity magic, and gravity itself is intimately connected with the universe. If you're still not convinced, we have another creature that adds more evidence to this, the Falling Star Beast. We can find a few variations of this throughout the game, but the most obvious one is the one on top of Mount Gelmir. This beast resembles a bull made out of rock. It lies in a crater at one of the highest points of the mountain. Now I hate to point out the obvious, but Falling Star Beast in a crater, Yeah, this beast came from space too, and what would you know, it has pincers just like Astol and a very obvious eye on its forehead. This one also uses gravity magic, so I think it's safe to assume that gravity magic comes from wherever these creatures come from, which is most likely somewhere in space, or at least another planet. Okay, so now we have 3 creatures from space. Well, big deal, how does this tie into the story of the lands between? Well, we're not done yet. Oh no, there is a 4th. The first creature I pointed out, we're going to call it Clam Face, has a twin. By now, even if you haven't played the game, you'll probably heard of Fear. This woman in black offers players something that most of us could do with a little bit more of these days, a hug. But like most things, the hug doesn't come for free. Fear is known as a deathbed companion, and while she actually plays a much larger role in the story, I'm going to leave most of that out for this video. What you really need to know is Fear's purpose. When Fear hugs you, she actually steals a little bit of your life, your warmth, as she puts it. She wants enough of this life force so that she can lay with Godwyn, the first of the demigods to die, and give him another chance at life. Godwyn's death was a big deal in the story. Godwyn the Golden was the son of Marsika the Eternal, a god, and Godfrey the first Elden Lord, a mortal. This made him a demigod, and as such he possessed his mother's immortality. But on the night of the Black Knives, his half-sister Lunar Princess Ranni stole a rune of death and gave a fragment of it to assassins. These assassins killed Godwyn, or at least killed his spirit, leaving his body behind. His body was laid to rest deep in the roots of the Erd Tree, and this is where players can find Fear, who plans to lay with Godwyn with the warmth of champions, to give him a new chance at life. Fun fact, when she says lay with him, she means in the old sense of the term, as we later find out she wants to conceive his child. Yeah, I mean it's been a long lockdown, but come on. But when we find Godwyn's body, it doesn't look like it was described in the intro cinematic. Nope, that's right, Godwyn's body is a clam face mermaid? So if we assume that the clam face with the third eye is related to the 2 creatures we know come from space, does that mean Godwyn also came from space? If so, how is that possible? I mean, this is Godwyn's body. We can see very clearly that it's his body, but it definitely looks like this creature from space. Well, we know that his father Godfrey, honestly these names, was a mortal, so that only leaves one suspect. That's right, Marsika is an alien. Think about it this way, we think that Marsika is a god. She is definitely the most powerful being in the game, and she's more powerful than anyone else. She serves the greater will, which is known as an outer god. Outer god? Outer space? After all, we know that the Elden Ring was sent from the cosmos to the lands between, so what is to say that Marsika wasn't as well? Rather than a god, Marsika is an alien from somewhere else in the universe, and that's why she's more powerful than the original inhabitants of this planet. Kind of similar to Superman, if you think about it. We know that Marsika is a Numen, but all we know about the lands of the Numen is that they lay outside the lands between. Possibly another continent, but equally as possibly another planet. That would mean her children with Godfrey are half alien, which could also explain why some of her children became omens. Speaking of omens, there are a number of shackles you can find to help with these fights. Reading the description of Margit says, though faint, the shackles still retain vestiges of power, enough to trap the once bound Margit on Earth, if only for a short time. On Earth? Not on the ground, not on the floor, on Earth. That seems like another pretty big hint to me. It's also worth pointing out that some of Marsika's children are, well, completely from Marsika. Radan is actually Marsika's male half, and she did have some children with him, or herself. These children are known as Empyrean, and they are very, very powerful indeed, which makes complete sense. It would also mean that these people are fully alien as well, just something to think about. Now this is where the theory starts to get a little crazy, well, crazier. I stumbled across something interesting while researching for this theory. Marsika being an alien from another planet and bringing her power to this one, only to end up a lifeless husk, really reminds me of Jenova from Final Fantasy VII. Without going into too much depth, Jenova was an alien from another planet, and her children, who in this case were people experimented on using her remains, inherited a portion of her power. They were almost demigods in their own right. But this is either the biggest coincidence I have ever discovered, or this is a very cheeky reference from the developers. Remember Astol, the boss we were talking about earlier? Well, compare him to the Jenova Dreamweaver boss from Final Fantasy VII Remake. There's no way, right? The head is almost exactly the same. Either somebody from FromSoft is a huge Final Fantasy fan, or this is a coincidence of the century. But I still have a few more cards up my sleeve for this theory. For my next play, let's talk about Radan. Radan is another of Queen Marika's offspring, although this time his parents were Queen Rennala and Radagon. Radagon being the male half of Marika. Radan, these names, was an incredibly powerful demigod. As he grew and gained in power, he also gained in size. His horse, which was already pretty feeble, couldn't support his massive weight, so he actually began to study gravity magic so that he could keep his trusty steed. But here is where this relates to the theory. Radan had such a strong affinity to gravity magic that he was able to control the stars, earning him the name Star Scourge. What if this massive affinity came from his bloodline, his alien bloodline? Remember, all the beings that we know come from space also have an affinity for gravity magic. In fact, he used his gravity magic to hold back a falling star, something that Blythe remarks on after his death. Well, holding back a falling star might seem reasonable. After all, such a thing could have devastating consequences for the planet. Except, this falling star wasn't even that big. We see it land on the planet after Radan dies, but most importantly, we see that the crater it leaves behind. It's really not that big, it only affected this tiny area of forest. Why was Radan so adamant that it couldn't fall? Maybe because he knows what's up there. He knows this planet isn't alone in the cosmos, and he is afraid of what is out there, especially considering how powerful Marika was. Imagine a whole planet full of them. This gets even more interesting when you consider the crater that the star leaves behind. One thing that stood out to me was the way that this falling star warps the gravity around the crater, not something a normal meteorite would do. Now, Radan being afraid of Marika's power actually makes a lot of sense. After all, it's heavily implied that there were other gods in the lands between before Marika got here, emphasis on the were. We can see the giant corpses of the gods in the Eternal City, and although it's implied that Astol was the one that killed them, Astol is not as powerful as Marika. We also see the remains of many giant beings in the land between, much bigger than those, including the giants in the north who found their end in their war against Marika. In fact, we also know that the dragons fought Marika too. We can see the corpse of Gransax in Leyendell, the capital, and we can also see the remains of the city of dragons, Farum Azula. Fun fact about this, Farum Azula is known as the capital, and I'm not entirely sure if that means capital for the dragons or if this was the original capital before Marika got here. It seems like the entire lands between were against Marika. Why? Because she invaded them. But after all this conflict and after the shattering of the Elden Ring, Marika is basically a husk. She locked herself in the Erd Tree protected by a barrier of thorns, and the only way to get inside is to burn the whole thing down. But this is also something very odd. Why a giant golden tree? What purpose does this serve? If you delve into the lore, you know that the Erd Tree is tied to the life cycle of the people of the lands between. Usually people would die and their souls would return to the tree. Almost like the life stream from Final Fantasy VII. Okay, I won't bring it up anymore, I promise. We know that after the shattering, something went wrong, and the tree is now absorbing the dead. We can see this from the roots, but this still doesn't explain why it's so massive and so bright. Because it's a holy symbol? Or is there another explanation? Now admittedly this is pure speculation, but assuming that Marika is an alien to this planet, and there are others out there, what's to say that she doesn't want to get back to them? After all, why is she so desperate to stay alive? She clings to her life as a shell. What kind of existence is this? Well, what if she's just biding her time? This idea came to me while exploring the highest points of the game. No matter how high you go, even at the top of mountains, the Erd Tree towers above you. It reaches far above the clouds. Something that big and that bright would be visible from space. What if all along the Erd Tree was Marika's beacon, a way to signal to the other aliens, perhaps for a rescue or perhaps for an invasion? Could this be what Radan was so afraid of? Is this what he was trying to hold back with his gravity magic? Did Marika seal herself away, hoping that she would have enough time for more of her kind to find her and possibly put her back together? Maybe this is why she was so happy to let her children fight amongst themselves. As long as they are fighting each other, they aren't turning on her. And she would have gotten away with it if it wasn't for those pesky Tarnished. This would also make the ending of the game even more poignant. No matter which ending you choose, the Erd Tree burns. You become Elden Lord and the lands between go on one way or another. By burning the tree, you ensured that more of these aliens wouldn't find the planet, at least for now. Now, one final thing I want to mention is the Elden Beast. The Elden Beast is the final story boss and you fight it after you've beaten Radan, which once again was the male half of Marsika. Now, the Elden Beast is the physical manifestation of the Elden Ring, and we know that this was sent to the lands between from the cosmos. Now, it's entirely possible that everything I've said about Marsika in this theory actually relates to the Elden Beast instead, and in fact, it's possible that Marsika was just the puppet of the Elden Beast. Also, take a note of the name. Elden Beast, meaning very ancient or very old, perhaps as old as the cosmos itself, also sounds very similar to Elder. The Elder gods were the gods in Lovecraftian mythology. They themselves were gods that came from outer space. So while it is still possible that Marsika is an alien, it's entirely possible that Marsika was just using the power of the Elden Beast, which would even have weird implications for her children. These children actually being children of the Elden Beast and not of Marsika. But there are far more things that could make this theory true. The nobles being a completely different shape to humans, for an example. Almost alien in their appearance. The Albinaurics looking like your traditional Area 51 style alien, and then the whole Ranni ending which sets the lands between on a journey across the cosmos. I can't cover everything in one video, but I'm sure the detectives in the comments will soon come up with things that either add to this theory or to counter it. But for now though, be sure to let me know if you enjoyed this video in the comments and leave a like on the video if you've made it this far through. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.